What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the garden. We're picking tomatoes, just getting started. Been picking for about a week, so they're kind of trickling in. But I thought this would be a great opportunity to give you 5 tips. We'll make it 6. I'll give you a bonus tip at the end. 6 tips of how to grow great tomatoes in your garden. Tomatoes are one of our favorite vegetables. I mean, you can tell we've got 42 plants here, so we eat a lot of tomatoes and we put up a lot of tomatoes. So tip number 1, if you're going to grow tomatoes, you really need to trellis them, train them. There's several different options that you can use. But if you just let tomatoes grow, they'll sprawl out on the ground. You'll lose a lot of fruit, ground contact, and insects. So the best tip I can give you is to trellis your tomatoes. Now, whether you use the old-fashioned stakes, which is what we've done this year, you can purchase these stakes for fairly cheap at your local home store, a couple bucks a piece, or you can cut some of your own. That's what we did this year. For twine, you can buy special twine that's used for tomatoes. We just use simple old baling twine. You can buy a box of baling twine that has 2 huge rolls that'll last you a lifetime for about 40 bucks. So that's the first way to do it. The second way is to use tomato cages. Now we have our cherry tomatoes are in cages. Cages are a great option, especially if you don't have that many tomato plants. If you only have a few, tomatoes are a great option. They're a little bit more expensive. You can make your own. The best cages are made out of the concrete reinforcing grid wire. Those make the best cages. There's lots of options that you can use. You can buy them at your local home store. They're a little more expensive if you buy them between probably, for smallest ones, probably $7 up till probably about $15, $20 or maybe even more. The third option is something we have done up until this year. We have used the Florida weave system. It's simply you take your tomato stakes, instead of putting them on each plant, you put them between each plant, and you basically weave the twine in and out around the stakes, which makes a trellis that trains it up. If you got a lot of tomato plants, that's probably your best option. Really, to do it right, you need to use something. You need to use some strong stakes, really like T-posts. Tip number 2 is feeding your tomatoes. Tomatoes are heavy feeders, so they need good fertilizer, whatever you choose to use, but they need good fertilizer. We always, whenever we plant our tomatoes, we fertilize them. When we dig the holes, we'll put a little fertilizer in there. Now you can use, if you want to use compost, you want to go organic, whatever you want to do, but we fertilize them when you plant them in there. They're heavy feeders, and then you want to continue to fertilize them as you go. The second thing that tomatoes really need is lime. Tomatoes really are prone to what is called blossom rot. That is where, this is the blossom end of your tomatoes. And what will happen is you'll get a little rot. The bottom of your tomatoes will start to rot. As soon as they start to turn red, you'll see they'll rot, and that is a calcium deficiency. So you want to make sure that you do use some lime. So every year when we put our garden to bed, we do lime our garden. In our area, it's hard to overlime. Another thing you can do if you have a problem with that is you can use a product like this. This is called Rot Stop. And you can buy this in, this is one that we purchased a few years ago when we didn't have a lot of tomatoes. This is just ready to go. You can spray it directly on your plants. But now if we have a problem with it this year, we had a little bit of a problem at the beginning of the year, and so we bought the concentrate. It's a lot more, the concentrate is a lot more economical if you've got a lot of tomatoes. Tip number 3, make sure that you prune your tomatoes. Now, pruning is something we normally think about when we think about fruit trees, but we need to prune our tomato plants. A couple of different reasons, a couple of different things there. If you prune your lower branches on your tomato plants, so the ones that are very closest to the ground, prune those up. That will help with your. That'll help when the plant starts to produce tomatoes, and it'll be easier to deal with because you won't have leaves there touching the ground. And it also helps with the insects and things like that, to not have any of your leaves touching the ground. So prune, take those few bottom leaves off your plant. I know that sounds kind of counterproductive, but it will help you in the long run to have a healthier plant. The second thing is sucker removal. Let me give you a good up close view. This is a branch off your tomatoes. You can see as they're growing. You can see right there in the middle, see that little leaf there? That is called a sucker. So what you want to do is you want to pull that little leaf off. Now, why do we do that? Why would we pull leaves off our plant? That will help you to have bigger tomatoes. Yes, you will have a few less tomatoes off your plant, but they will be bigger. But that's your choice. You choose not to sucker. We did not sucker this year. We have so many plants that it's just hard. Number 4 is controlling insects. Now, there are a few insects that really wreak havoc on your tomato plants. Early on, it's something called cutworms. If you're not careful, a cutworm can come in and they can just wipe out your tomato plants. They'll cut them off at the ground. So, just be really careful about those. If you got a problem with cutworms, you want to deal with that immediately. One thing you could do is when you transplant your tomato plants, if you got a problem with cutworms, you can take a empty toilet paper tube and put that on the bottom, the base, your stem of your tomato plant, and that will keep the cutworms from getting in there and cutting your tomatoes off at the ground. We don't really have a problem with cutworms here. Place we used to be, we had a big problem with cutworms, and we would have to protect the tomato plants, pepper plants from just being cut off at the ground. That is, I'll tell you what, it's the worst thing to come out and check on your little baby plants that you've just spent all that time planting, and you can see it's just laying on the ground. So cutworms is one thing. Another thing is, which is a big problem here, is a hornworm. We have big problems with hornworms now. I'll give you a picture of what a hornworm is. We've already found, I think Michelle's picked about 4 worms off of our plant so far, and it's going to start getting worse. They'll actually eat your leaves. They'll eat the leaves and your stems of your plants, and actually they'll even eat your tomatoes. They'll begin to eat on the outside of your tomatoes. The hornworm it turns into a moth, but it's the larval stage of that moth, and it will wreak some havoc on your garden. Matter of fact, a lot of times you can tell you've got hornworms by looking on the ground, and you'll see brown dots, and that's worm poop, and they're feeding on your plants. So the best way to take care of those is just walk around every morning and look at your tomato plants, pull them off, dispose of them. Don't pull them off, give them to your chickens, do whatever you need to do. But you gotta watch out for hornworms, because they are really bad, and they'll really do some damage on tomatoes. And if you see one, I guarantee you'll see some more. So the best way to handle the hornworms is just looking at your plants every day, looking for signs and pulling them off, but just being consistent about pulling them off and disposing of them. You can use, there's a product for hornworms, and for cutworms. Another thing you could use is what's called DT, diatomaceous earth, to sprinkle around the bottom of your plants. You can also use that on your tomato plants. It is an organic way to kind of handle insects. It's kind of like it is a broken down fossilized material, and it's like broken glass for an insect, and they will not cross over that. They do not like to move across that. So if you're looking for something organic, DT is a great way to go. If you got a real problem, and you can use something like 7 Dust to take care of that. Just got to make sure you be real careful. If you use that, make sure you're washing everything before you eat it. So tip number 5 is, when you're harvesting your tomatoes and you're picking them, skip the refrigerator. Don't put your tomatoes in the refrigerator. Keep them on your counter. The refrigerator kills, number 1, it kills the taste of your tomatoes. And number 2, it's not necessary. Just you put them on your counter, eat on them as you go. And if you got a lot, make you a batch of salsa. Can them. We can a lot of tomatoes every year. We make a large batch of salsa that we can. We make usually spaghetti sauce and then canned whole tomatoes. But don't put them in the refrigerator. That's a great tip for you. Bonus tip number 6. Make sure you're weeding your tomato plants. Don't let weeds grow up in your plant. Don't let the grass grow up. Those weeds are competing for the nutrients in the soil, and they will rob your tomato plants of that. So make sure you keep them clean. The best way to do that is just, being out on a regular basis, chopping the weeds with a garden hoe, taking care of those things. That's why we don't use any herbicide, anything like that. We just use a hoe and you know, to get around the plants, and then we till in between the rows, keep all that down, and that will help you to have healthy plants. It'll keep the help keep the insects down. You'll reap the rewards of it by having a nice clean garden. That, number one, you come out here, you feel better because the garden's nice and clean. It's not full of grass and weeds. That's all I got, guys. I hope that one of these tips has helped you to grow better tomato plants. If you got a tip, something I left out, throw it in the comments. I'd love to see it. You know, we've been growing tomatoes I've been around tomatoes all my life. Michelle's grandparents were tomato farmers. They farmed acres and acres of tomatoes. So we've grown up around tomatoes, but there's always more to learn. So if you got some tips for us, plug it in down there below, and we would appreciate it.